Ladies and gentlemen, I am Dr. Claudia Albers, Planet X researcher and professional physicist, and today I'd like to talk to you about another one of my articles. This one is entitled Tidal Surges and Other Events Point to Planet X Being Here and Now. So recently there have been reports of ocean receding in certain areas of the world, such as what happened along the western coast of Florida. And figure 1 shows people walking out onto the wet sand where there used to be several feet of water. And this is in Tampa Bay, Florida. Now the phenomenon has been explained as a result of a hurricane blowing a strong wind near the coast. However, the bay remained empty for way too long, and for this to be a possible explanation. And as anyone should have noticed, when you blow on the surface of, say, a bowl of soup, water always comes back to fill an empty space. You can create waves by blowing and possibly create a small water surface level differential, but you cannot stop water from filling a space the moment you blow in a slightly different direction, unless the actual water level changes. So the only reason the sea could have receded in the manner that it did, and for this amount of time, say about 19 hours, and the only reason could possibly have been a change in the sea level. Now we need to look at what causes, therefore, these sea level changes, and so we're going to look at tides in this article. But this was observed before. On August 12, 2017, a beach in Brazil was empty, and at the time there was no hurricane to blame for this phenomenon. And it also happened in Uruguay. So this happened in August. Both times there was no hurricane. And it happened on the Chilean coast, on the other side of South America. There was a tidal surge. In other words, the sea level went up significantly and large waves crashed onto shore. And again, there was no hurricane to blame for this. So, but what could possibly cause this is the presence of an object close to the Earth and causing a tidal surge or tidal events, just like the moon causes on Earth. So now from observing the objects close to the sun in the sun's corona, which I call stellar cores, and sometimes I call them brown dwarf stars. I started out calling them brown dwarf stars, but since I've seen that they are basically a solid core of a star surrounded by a small ionizing envelope, I've started calling them stellar cores. Sometimes I call them stellar remnants because they are old stars that have gone through an aging process which took them through the red giant and the white dwarf phases, and they are a lot like white dwarfs, but they emit very little visible light, sometimes only infrared light, and they are attached to the sun, and they are acting like parasites, robbing the sun of energy and plasma. So there are several of these objects around. They seem to be quite numerous in the universe at present. From what I've observed, there are possibly thousands of them around the sun right now, and there are possibly 4 or 5 extremely large ones that are larger in size than the sun itself. And I've written extensively about these objects. So it's obvious they are attracted to the sun, but they don't behave as if the gravitational force is the interaction that is occurring between them and the sun. To me, it looks like the main interaction is magnetic, and possibly the electric force also plays a part. And these are the strongest interactions in the universe. The gravitational interaction is very weak if it exists at all. And it could possibly, what we observe as the gravitational force is actually the action of 2 forces, the magnetic and the electric together. But the gravitational force still remains an easy way of explaining certain phenomena, and one of them is tides. So so I'm going to use the gravitational force to model the effect of tides, and it's possible that the gravitational force is still an interaction that is occurring between objects. However, from observing these stellar cores, it doesn't seem to feature, at least with any strength between them, because we see these objects sometimes stationary, close to the sun. Sometimes we see them moving slowly away, and slowly away means that they are repulsed or accelerated away from the sun. This could possibly be due to the electric interaction. The electric field seems to increase in areas of increased sunspot activity, and possibly that's what leads to solar flares. And all this I have written about recently. So it could be that the attractive force is the magnetic force and the repulsive force is the electric force, and they two together lead to to the way we see these objects acting. But tides is most easily explained in terms of a gravitational attraction. So this is what I'm going to use here. And tides on Earth, and what we see in this diagram here is a tide, so this would be the high tide when the ocean level is highest. And it's affected by the moon and the sun, and here we see the effect of the moon. If the moon is, say, on this side, then it would exert a gravitational attraction to the ocean or the surface of the ocean, which then bulges out towards the moon. On the other side, the effect the moon exerts is also, it's in the same direction, but it counteracts the force that the Earth exerts on the surface of the ocean. So it decreases the gravitational force on the surface of the ocean, and therefore it bulges outwards as well. So this is what is causing the bulge on both sides. Now, we also have the fact that the Earth is not spherical, completely spherical, and there is a small bulge at around the equator. So that is in there as well, but mainly what I'd like to show here is the high tide due to the action, to the effect of the moon. Now the sun also has an effect, but it's not as strong. And so high tides, usually called spring tides, happen mainly due to the moon, but the sun also exerts a small effect, so it leads to even higher tides. And tides at when the moon is at other positions, say at 90 degrees to the sun's position, we get a lower tide called a neap tide. We can see in this diagram here, when the moon and the sun are in alignment, you get this higher tide, which is called the spring tide. When they are at 90 degrees to each other, we get the solar tide and the moon tide separately, so the difference in height is not as severe, and this is called the neap tide. So it depends on the phases of the moon, and so at new moon we would get a spring tide, and at full moon we'd get a spring tide as well. So in both of these positions. In other positions we don't get as high a tide difference. Now it also depends on the fact that the Earth's orbit is not completely spherical. It has an aphelion and a perihelion position, and a perihelion position when it's closest to the sun, so this would lead to a slightly higher tide, but the effect is infinitesimal. And the moon's orbit around the Earth is also not spherical, so it's got a position where it's closest to the Earth, and it's called the perigee position, and it has an apogee position. The moon looks larger when it's in its full moon phase, so it would, if it was over here at perigee, and it's sometimes called a supermoon. And so whether the moon, when the moon's at perigee, it's closest to the Earth, so it will cause an even higher spring tide difference is small, it's only 2%, but it leads to a different name. It's called a perigean spring tide. So this is when the moon is in its perigee position, so it's closest to the earth, and it's in line with the sun, so they are in alignment, and this would cause a perigean spring tide. And the same over here in the new moon phase. Now, it's also affected by the fact that the Earth's actual tilt is 23.4 degrees and the moon's orbital tilt is 5 degrees. So here is the ecliptic. This is the plane of rotation of the orbit of the Earth around the sun. And the Earth's actual tilt is illustrated here. It's 23.4 degrees and the moon's orbital tilt is 5 degrees. So as you can see, where the tide bulges the most is in line with the moon. And this affects the tides, and the tides that someone at a certain position on the earth would feel twice a day, because you'd get 2 tides a day. As the earth rotates, it meets the bulges caused by the moon twice. However, the moon moves, so the difference in time is about, it's not every 12 hours, it's every 12 hours and 25 minutes. So we have therefore these tides on Earth, and it's due to the presence of the moon. So if we have tidal surges like we've observed in Tampa, Florida, in Brazil, in Uruguay, it's to be expected that we have an object, a very massive object close to the Earth, causing these effects. So and these should be even higher than what we'd expect from high tide. So the object is either closer to the Earth than the moon, or it's much more massive than the moon and maybe further away. So if we do have such an object close to the Earth, we would see other effects. We would possibly see increased earthquake and volcanic activity. So let's see, and let's look to see if we have had higher earthquake activity. Well, we don't have far to look. We've just had a very large earthquake in Mexico. The reported magnitude was 7.1. However, the damage was so severe and the building seemed to have swayed at such a rate, even though the epicenter of the earthquake was about 100 miles from Mexico City, that I would actually think that it was of a higher magnitude, perhaps an 8.5, or possibly it was because the epicenter was very close to the surface. The reported was about 50 miles from the surface, but that is reasonably close, I suppose. And at the same time, a volcano close to Mexico City, about 43 miles southeast, this volcano also erupted. So we had the two things happening, the earthquake and the volcano erupting at this time. And this was only after a few weeks since the last earthquake that Mexico experienced. It experienced another one on September 8th, I believe, an 8 magnitude earthquake. So this was only a few days away. So this shows an increased earthquake activity in the area. Now, about the same time, about 7 hours 29 minutes later, New Zealand also experienced this earthquake, a 6.1 magnitude earthquake. And after that, 1 hour apart, 2 other earthquakes. I think that was a 5.1 and a 4.7 magnitude earthquakes. So the earthquake and the volcanic activity seems to be there. So other possible effects that we would expect is increased lightning activity and fissures opening up in the earth, and increased meteor activity if the object is bringing a debris field with it. Of course, the object that is likely to be close to the earth, and I have written about it before. You may find my articles and my videos on it interesting, and they do explain why I think this object is near at the moment, and this is more corroborating evidence that it is. And I also have explained before that I don't think it's actually a planet. I think it's a brown dwarf star, or a star on its way to becoming a brown dwarf star, since it emits the low energy red visible light that we know from historical records it has been reported to emit. I believe it was found by Dr. Harrington, and that he was probably killed because of his finding. The object is a threat to life on Earth, and the phenomena that we see happening in terms of earthquakes, volcanic activity, and possibly more that will happen, and the severity of these effects, such as tidal surges and the cities close to the ocean being invaded by the water, will possibly increase in the coming days and months. Now, the object is possibly not clearly discernible, as many artificial devices are in use, and they have been developed since the 1980s, such as sun simulators, lens flares, chemtrails, and these are used to hide these objects in the sky. This is not the only object. There are many, possibly thousands, of brown dwarf stars in the sky and close to the sun, and these objects are being hidden from the Earth's population. So this type of object, since it's a star and it's therefore ionizes the ionosphere, and this would lead to earthquakes. Earthquakes, I have explained before, can be explained in terms of lightning or discharges within the Earth, and earthquakes themselves as thunder inside the Earth. So this is what we would expect to happen, and in fact other things are happening that are shocking, I think, and that is that the technology seems to have been developed to permanently deal with the fact that the earth has dried out, that we would have no rain as a result of the burning of fossil fuels, and that rain is artificially being created. And this is being detailed and documented in this website, weatherwar101.com. And I think that the tidal surges are possibly being hidden by the creation of hurricanes, and a secondary aim of the production of these storms is the depopulation of several areas on the surface of the planet, such as the islands of the Caribbean. And what they are trying to hide is possibly an object that looks like this, Planet X of Nibiru. So in conclusion, several events from tidal surges, ocean recession, earthquakes, and volcanic eruptions point to the Earth being under the influence of a large object, which is likely to be Planet X on Nibiru, the planet of the crossing. The presence of this object near the Earth corroborates the signs set by the Creator in the construction of the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx, which indicate a transition from one era to another, and it seems to be set to happen, and I reported this in previous articles, within the next few days or perhaps hours. This is Dr. Claudia Albers, Planet X physicist. Thank you for watching.